Baldurs Gate 3 is a CRPG that has exploded in popularity beyond anyone's imagination, including the devs, and with it has come interesting opinions. But this video isn't really about Baldurs Gate 3, nor is it about Oshi No Ko, or Squid Game, or Crochet, or One Piece. This video is about hobby tourism.
But what is hobby tourism?
Well, apparently it's something I made up on the fly because Google is telling me it's about actual tourism. So how do I define it? A hobby tourist is someone who treats a hobby or piece of media like a quick little jaunt or fun excursion, which isn't bad in itself, but it can have negative effects. Hobby tourism at its core is about people who see well-established communities and enter from the most popular point. And much like real tourists, they may come back from this trip with a little arrogance and some misplaced beliefs. Think your cousin who just got back from their gap year trip to Thailand and thinks Bangkok is an undiscovered gem no one's heard of.
So, back to Baldurs Gate 3, the best CRPG ever, the peak of gaming, revolutionary, a masterpiece, the game of the year, or maybe the decade. No one has ever done anything like this or this well. We're seeing a change in the times of bloat, battle passes, and boring games. What? Larian Studios also made Divinity Original Sin 2 and Original Sin 1, RPGs with similar elements. Oh, but this is the only CRPG ever, right? Oh, it's a whole genre with years of history and many games that do what Baldurs Gate 3 does just as good, but in the past? Oh.
It's an underrepresented genre for sure, but it's been there, well, since computers. The C in CRPG stands for computer because the alternative at the time was a TTRPG. Tabletop games. As soon as we worked out those fancy calculators could do the maths parts of D&D for us, the genre was up and running. Of course, now there are tropes and conventions and evolutions. Comparing Fallout 1 to Baldur's Gate 3 isn't so fair, but look at Wasteland, Pathfinder Kingmaker, Pillars of Eternity, Shadowrun. Is Baldur's Gate 3 really standing out?
Well, maybe if this is the first time you've ever heard of a CRPG or a Baldur's Gate game, you'd be reasonably expected to not know too much. The problem comes when people say things like this.
Now, I have no ill will towards Rami himself. This is just the first tweet I saw in this and remembered to save. But I do have a question. What actually is Baldur's Gate 3 doing that's so risky? No microtransactions? Elden Ring and Tears of the Kingdom don't have any. State-of-the-art graphics? Divinity 2 is about equal for its time. Being fun? Nope, there are plenty of other CRPGs that scratch that same itch. Doing all this while independent? Well, they've been doing that since 1996. So why are we praising them so much? They've been here the whole time doing amazing work, but because you all just noticed suddenly they're God's gift to gaming companies? Well, it's because to a lot of people getting into Baldur's Gate 3, it is a novel experience. It is the best game of its genre, or of this year. They truly feel that way. And I am glad Larian Studios are getting this well-deserved attention. Be it big or small, long or short, I am confident that their next game will be just as good.
I love Larian Studios. I've been a fan for years. Baldur's Gate 3 is a fantastic next step in the genre they've been making for decades. Not to say this isn't a marked improvement from their previous game, but that's the best part about CRPGs. They focus on player freedom and agency at the cost of not looking like Starfield. So instead of stunning vistas and an open world, you get masses of dialogue and story, and a world just small enough where you can go into every building and talk to almost any person. To me, what's impressive about Baldur's Gate 3 isn't the visuals or the scope, which, by the way, is only a little bit longer than most CRPGs or JRPGs. What's impressive to me is the dedication of the team, the respect for games as a medium, and the passion from everyone involved.
Now, the issue isn't with Baldur's Gate or Larian Studios. The issue is this happens every other month. Tears of the Kingdom, oh my god, best game ever, no exploitation, amazing gameplay, 10 out of 10. Animal Crossing, first game ever to not have fighting, savior of our lockdown. Elden Ring, revolutionary, truly the peak of open world gaming. No one will ever do this again. But they do. Constantly. You're just only noticing now. I think we should stop allowing games to get away with doing the bare minimum of not exploiting their players and employees. The fact that a public statement about not wanting to add microtransactions was enough to catapult Larian into the stratosphere of public praise is ridiculous, because that's not even putting the bar on the ground, it's 6 feet under. Interestingly, as we write this, there's actually been a bit of a shift in the way people talk about Baldur's Gate 3. Act 3 is a little jank. It's not the most polished. Understandable. It's actually only been out for a week. Most people haven't reached those areas, and as Act 1 was the part of the game available in early access, it probably received the most attention, at least from a developer standpoint. But what I think is the most interesting is that people have started to criticize this flash in the pan reaction to games. People are annoyed that people are treating this game as brilliant. An interesting turn, but I kind of doubt it would lead to much self-reflection. For video games, I can already see what the next object of desire will be for hobby tourists. It's going to be Starfield. And that makes me sad, because in a way, I am happy Baldur's Gate 3 is getting this type of affection. You can see in every piece of press they put out just how excited they are that people love their game. Fun statistics, flavor text in patch notes that show attentiveness to the player base, and retweeting horny fan art. It's nice to see how much fun they're having with the success of this game. I just hope they take the money this has made them and use it to keep the studio going sustainably. Considering their track record with making Baldur's Gate 3 off their own back, I have high hopes Larian will make good choices. So is Baldur's Gate 3 good? Yes, undeniably. But don't just take my word for it. Let's go over to famed Larian Studios fan and YouTube star PartyMurloc. What do you think of Baldur's Gate 3?
Hold on one sec, I am talking to Karnak.
Now maybe this is because gaming is becoming more popular and more mainstream. Maybe it's because a lot of these are sequels or come from series and studios with very devoted communities who will talk about them. Maybe every new game really is just the best ever. But personally, I think it's because hobby tourists have a tendency to also immediately forget what they did last month. This brings me on to Squid Game. I get to be a big hipster about Squid Game, because as a longtime Death Game fan, I immediately watched it on day one. And then a week later, so did the rest of the world. Thousands of memes, millions of views, and no money for the creator Hwang Dong-hyuk. The show was inescapable. People cosplayed the guards, shovelware meme games were made, people made videos explaining how a Korean director was actually talking about American capitalist ideas. But now, nothing. The most attention it's gotten is because Netflix are slimy dickheads and made millions off a man talking about how the system exploits people. You can't buy the masks at conventions, no one wears cosplay, no one talks about it. It's gone. We moved on to the next thing. As a fan of the genre, I was annoyed. All of these people suddenly loved the thing I love, except they didn't. No one wanted to hear about Money Game, or By the God's Will, or Liar Game, because they didn't like death games. They liked Squid Game. And it was the best thing ever, and no media ever spoke about these issues or subverted children's games or had ever been Korean before. It was just the next stop on their tour. I'm genuinely intrigued what will happen when season 2 comes out, because another issue with hobby tourism is people don't actually like what you've made. They like being part of a community. They want to be in on the conversation. You can't guarantee that perfect storm will happen next time, and the idea that those millions of people are unshakable fans is misplaced. There is also an element of the companies behind these projects having culpability in encouraging hobby tourism. The binge model requires people to watch all of a TV show, because that may be what everyone else has done. I've seen some criticisms of Good Omens releasing all at once. The idea that if it was airing weekly, as Neil Gaiman wanted, then we still wouldn't be at the finale yet. Just having the space to digest and theorize an episode at a time would keep hype constant and for longer, instead of being a supernova put out by the next thing a company releases. Have you ever watched something from when you were younger and it feels shorter? Like there's just less than you remember. Because that anticipation, those water cooler discussions, theorizing with your friends on the playground, it all added to your experience of the show as a whole and made it a larger part of your life, an all-consuming part of your life for just a few months. Which brings me on to Crochet. Now hold on here, like I said, this is about hobby tourists. So let's talk about a hobby. Crochet is like knitting, but I don't know how it works, and that's not relevant to the video. Feel free to yell at me in the comments, I love learning new things. Anyway, a lot of people got into crochet, and I'd say it's still relatively trendy, but it's definitely settling down and a lot of the tourists have moved on. When it first started to trend, it also coincided with the TikTok trend of small businesses. A lot of people over lockdown had more time and less money and turned their hand to creating. People quit their jobs if they hadn't lost them, went full time off a viral TikTok, or tried to be the most ethical company around. A lot of them failed. Businesses fail all the time, but this was pretty en masse. But it was slow. Once your million view video died out and you fulfilled the maybe 100 orders it got you, it all slowed down to a dribble. No one actually cared about your product. It was just the next fast fashion trend to wear crochet tank tops. And you were the cheapest option, because you undersold the value of your labor. I want to talk about this because I'm passionate, but this isn't the video for it. Actually, scratch that. Fuck it. My video, my tangent. When you are selling a product, your labor has value. Not putting that into your calculations is going to fuck you long term. You are not Amazon, you cannot undercut a market and then hike your prices later. You will die. If you have to work 30 hours on a product, then that is unfortunately now worth hundreds of pounds of your time. And either you need to market yourself to people who can afford that, or you need to get your production time down. This was a big problem with hobby tourists. They weren't professionals. This may have even been the first item they'd made. If it's full-time, you need to be covering all your expenses, not just the work that goes into a product, but enough so you can live and buy food. Work out your monthly outgoing and how many products you make in a month. Divide those numbers. That is your markup for sundries. I've seen so many people who will take the value of materials in a product and add a few % profit. As someone who makes spreadsheets of fictional market stalls for fun and has researched weird specific business costs to make those spreadsheets more accurate, it's not your materials that are going to be the bulk of your cost. Rent, electricity, replacing machinery, hiring help. These are the big boys, the real costs. And if you're getting by on a razor's edge, then you will have to stop someday and find something that makes you the money you need to live. And that doesn't even cover taxes. It varies by country and type of business and all other things, so look into it and work out how much you should be putting aside at the end of the month. There should be a percentage. I've seen small and big creators get stung by tax, and it may genuinely wipe you out in an instant. Do research and look into everything. I know you just want to create things, but if you're a small business, you have to do the business part too. If you can't do that, you just shouldn't run a business. It's not good for you or your customers. But you don't have to do it alone. If you have someone who is business-minded, a partnership could work. Small businesses can be legally considered under 100 employees or under £1 million in revenue, depending on criteria. The small business community online has warped the perspective on this. You probably shouldn't be doing all of this on your own. I'm lucky to have a partner who's as passionate about business and creating as I am, and who has a skill set that complements mine. I'm also aware of how putting your faith in others can cause a business to disintegrate. Business is risk. It will not lift you out of your situation like magic, or fix all your problems. It will be hard work and struggle, and you will make mistakes. But learning how to continue in a capacity that you can cope with is possible with trial and error. Okay, to tie this back to hobby tourists before I go even deeper. I saw a lot of small businesses think their virality would be the norm and spend hundreds, maybe thousands on materials and products, only for no one to come back. Hell, sometimes I feel that way with this channel. 18k views, 800, 5.6k, 500, 14k, 1.9k, 100, 100, 100. We've still not hit the peak of that first video, and maybe we never will again. But I believe in Mary Kiwi. I believe we can make good content that people will enjoy. So if you want to help, we have a Patreon, and honestly just commenting and sending this to someone you think will like it really helps us out. I want us to do well, and I won't stop trying or give up. Also, a little insider information specifically for YouTube. If you want to support a channel, watch to the end of the video. The algorithm very much rewards watch time and retention over views. Just clicking on and off may actually hurt a video's performance. You're telling the algorithm it was boring, you left. Obviously don't watch if you hate it, but letting a video run to the end will help out if you want to. You know, just mute the tab or something.
So, Oshi No Ko. That was the 14k video just mentioned. We already discussed this idea in the context of anime fandoms, so watch that if you want. It's only 7 minutes. But to tie this into hobby tourism as a whole, a lot of people thought Oshi No Ko was the best anime ever, or maybe the best idol anime ever if they knew a little bit more. And again, it's the only good one. No idol anime would ever touch on dark topics. This truly is the peak of the genre. Perfect Blue is a 1991 anime film by renowned director Satoshi Kon that has a section on its Wikipedia page entitled Reception and Legacy. It regularly tops anime films in various genres. A must-see. It's about the dark side of the idol industry. When we did research for that Oshi No Ko video, we found out, according to long-term idol anime fans, that almost all idol shows touch on the dark side of the industry to varying extents. Even Love Live. It's really hard not to feel a sense of annoyance with the community around anime at the moment. A lot of people got into anime over the pandemic and now treat it like some dirty, cringy phase they had as a teenager, and now that they're 17, they're far too old for that baby shit. As people who never grew out of that phase, it definitely stings a little. And I don't think a phase is wrong to have had. Losing and gaining interests and hobbies is natural, and adds to who you are as a person. I think bemoaning your past self is useless and reductive, and we'd all be better off if we didn't do it. It makes makes you feel bad, and it makes people still in that phase feel bad. I don't think I'm the only person to have something I love tainted by someone insulting it. When it comes to video games, an argument can be made for accessibility. If you don't have a good enough PC or the right console, playing any one game might be impossible. But for anime and other TV shows, accessibility has never been higher, even if it's not necessarily through conventional means. I'd even be confident you could find a lot of people who are aware of Perfect Blue from its place in anime culture and popular culture in general, but no one remembered it at that moment. Everything else was pushed aside for the shiny new thing. Is it psychological? A recency bias? Do we simply lose sight of everything else in that moment of heightened emotions? Maybe.
There are maybe hundreds of YouTube videos talking about Animal Crossing New Horizons being a bad game or a disappointing game, normally blaming Nintendo, but I'd like to take a turn to blame the fanbase. The game was peak hobby tourism. Of 42 million units sold, it was the most popular game in the series, beating the fan favourite New Leaf threefold. A lot of people were new to the series and invested a lot of time into it. The people who had the most time were children. Well, teenagers. And the drama that came out of this demographic was so toxic that any video trying to talk about New Horizons will inevitably mention it, and we are no different. For most of these people, Animal Crossing probably passed them by because they were too young to have been there, and I'm not going to blame people for being born before a video game I liked. I am, however, going to blame them for being absolutely fucking insane about it. Complaints about stealing an island's theme, bickering over villagers, constantly leaking new items online, and in general making a cozy game a toxic wasteland that suffocated anyone too casual or too old for this shit. Most of this part of the fandom took on the identity of cozy gamer, yet never really seemed to know what the word cozy meant. Personally, I don't think suicide baiting and doxing is cozy. These fans were also often accused of hobby gentrification, trying to change the game to be something it wasn't, often against the wishes of people who are already there. Hobby tourism and hobby gentrification often go hand in hand, but they don't always. Tourists can just talk big game about something, overemphasizing it or having shallow misinformed opinions on it. For instance, claiming games like Cult of the Lamb were in the same genre of cozy gaming. Now, part of this was definitely a marketing attempt to make the game seem better or more suitable, but the problem was that they're just not similar. A lot of people who liked New Horizons would absolutely not like Cult of the Lamb. I'd even go so far as to say they're nothing alike. Even the art styles are barely similar. Cult of the Lamb is creepy cute, New Horizons is just cute. Basically no game has tried to be what Animal Crossing is, because the real-world clock element is a very tricky mechanic to get right. If your game is just a cute management sim with animals, it's not like Animal Crossing. Hobby tourists tried to carve a niche for themselves in a community they hated: gamers. And in doing so, revealed they knew absolutely nothing about gaming or Animal Crossing. Constant attempts to create a brand around cutesy gaming that wasn't like those gross sweaty neckbeards, claiming any game was actually cozy, even if it was highly stressful and required quite a lot of skill. Acting as if women in gaming was revolutionary, to the point of insulting women who've been in the community for years. It was ridiculous, and I still see its effects today. But since they're tourists, they're not playing Animal Crossing New Horizons anymore. Now, I'm not saying that to be a fan you have to play a game until you die, but when every game someone is claiming to be super into is the current most popular game, and they stop playing immediately, or when the trend moves on, and they move on with it, it's hard not to get a little suspicious of their intentions. It's a little posery, especially if they're using it for some kind of social clout, but it's worrying when they bring certain ideas into a community. An idea I saw with Animal Crossing New Horizons was that you should be able to pay money to get access to all the items and recipes, instead of having to work to find them. I get the frustration. The recipe drop rates were notoriously awful, but promoting scummy microtransactions to fix it was not an idea the community should have entertained. In our last video, I complained briefly about Animal Crossing Pocket Camp, but I think this is the game these fans wanted. A simple, easy box filled with infinite dopamine as a vessel for creating content online. But I never saw it mentioned as a viable alternative, just proof New Horizons was doing something wrong. I do still wish we got all of the items in New Horizons, but the items in Pocket Camp are funded by millions in microtransactions, and trying to keep you on the app as long as possible. I don't want that in a mainline Animal Crossing game. I don't even want that in Pocket Camp, really. When it comes down to it, these hobby tourists never engaged with the game on the level it expected. By time traveling and speedrunning the game, people were left empty and pissed off at it for not giving them infinite fun. But the game was obviously never meant to do that. The Animal Crossing series has always been transparently about being a virtual life adjacent to yours, that's there for you to indulge in for an hour or so as escapism. The advertising shows this, the creator describes it as this, but all these new fans didn't know that or try to look deeper, and decided the game was wrong for not letting them play how they wanted. And I hope to God the next game doesn't try to appeal to these people, because I don't think they'll be coming back, or at least I'd rather they wouldn't.
One Piece is a fantastic recent example. The long-awaited Gear 5 reveal episode released and fans went wild! People were loving it! And then slowly, as the hours passed, I started to notice a different narrative appear. That the episode was bad, the animation was ugly and too hard to read, which I disagree with for the record. What happened here was a perfect case study in anime tourism. People watched this episode 1071, without watching any of the previous episodes, because it was hyped and popular. And then, when they didn't understand it, they got annoyed at the show and the fans, like it was supposed to make sense if you hadn't watched the previous 1,000 episodes. People were literally complaining about not understanding what happened. It's not Judge Judy, you can't jump into any episode and have the whole story make sense. These tourists felt entitled to all the excitement the longtime fans had, without any of the time investment and devotion. If you just started getting interested in One Piece because of the hype around Gear 5, then that's cool. If you watched episode 1071 and liked it, that's cool too. Now is the perfect time to get into One Piece. But if you just watched that one episode and are planning on moving on to the next piece of media, then you might just be a hobby tourist. If you want to be a positive presence in communities, then engage with it. It's literally that simple. If it's an anime or TV show, watch it. If it's a game, play it, and if it's music, listen to it. And then when you have, take a look at what the community is talking about. What are the discussions about? What does everyone love? This may sound mean, but you have no right to enter a community without actually trying to participate. Going to a midnight screening of the most popular episode of One Piece is all well and good, but the people there will expect you to know who Luffy is. Plus, it's such a shame. The length of One Piece is one of its greatest strengths. Getting to watch a journey of operatic proportions and following the crew every step of the way is so good. If and when you get into the show, the 1,000 episodes won't be daunting, it will be exciting. Obviously, if you don't like One Piece, that's fine too, but bro, it's so good and you get so much of it.
Now we've made our stance on AI very obvious on this channel, and after the hellstorm that was the comments on that video, I didn't want to entertain it much more, but it turns out it's actually the ideal example of hobby tourism. A large part of the criticism we have with AI is that they want the perceived benefits of being an artist without putting any effort in. The reason I say perceived is because being an artist is really fucking hard, but to these people, artists are millionaires with their working galleries. This could often be seen in the way they would act as if they were some kind of oppressed underdog, and lash out at artists who called them out as if they were punching down and not just making reasonable points. AI art bros also refuse to integrate with the community of artists already there and would frequently reinvent things. I remember one guy on Twitter thinking he was a genius for coming up with the idea of letters that look a bit like pictures, and had essentially reinvented typography. But because he was an amateur and had little experience, his work was poor quality and ignored the decades of work that had already gone into typography to build conventions of readability and use. Now the issue here isn't in reinventing, but in the cockiness to then try and sell this idea as novel. It just reeks of someone who's done no research and has limited understanding of the topic they're claiming to be an expert on. It wasn't just this guy, it was all of them. The endless courses and guides and just little pieces of trash that were being sold like solid gold. But what about the transitory nature of being a hobby tourist? Well, these were the same people who were hawking NFTs last year and crypto the year before that. A lot of hobby tourists are annoying and maybe rude, but these guys were specifically malicious in the way they appropriated communities to turn a quick buck. There are similar grifters in other art communities. I already mentioned Crochet, and there were absolutely people only getting in on it for the money because it was a trend. I think there were like 2 guys who bought knitting.com and destroyed it or something. Unfortunately, because there's often a cockiness to the types of people who will enter communities in this way, they may talk over or spread harmful ideas. This may be in trying to sell the first thing you ever made for 500 quid, or sharing around techniques that are ineffective or damaging, or maybe just they're plain wrong. I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder about the genre of YouTube videos where someone will claim to be an expert on a topic and then at some point reveal they're a first year in uni. I have a whole ass master's degree, but I still worry I only have part of the information on the games industry and rarely correct people because I've got no real industry experience. I think being too humble or shy is as much of a negative as being too assertive, and I think in the pursuit of dealing with hobby tourists, a few of us could do calling out grifters a little more, and others could maybe think a little before trying to to settle community disputes when they also know very little. I'm sure all of us have seen someone call someone out only to reveal they also have no clue what's going on. If I were to give positive advice, I'd say it's normally best to take it up in someone's DMs first, where possible. They may just be mistaken, so calmly and gently asking for clarification is a good first step. Don't accuse them and try to be nice. If they're a dick to you, at least you'll have tried to be the better person. If what they're doing is malicious or dangerous, then publicly but still calmly and gently correcting them may be a better option in case people try to emulate what's being shown. Also, just double check if you're right about the issue. If it's safety, you should be able to find evidence of what is or isn't safe. For instance, people who claim you can use AI artwork in a way that has full copyright ownership should be politely reminded that in the US, it was ruled that a product must have human authorship to be considered copyrightable, and it may not be smart to build a whole business off of work anyone can technically use.
Elden Ring was another great example of the exact kind of behaviour we have been talking about. FromSoft has had a cult following since the release of Demon's Souls. Their games are only getting more and more popular with each subsequent release, and the wave of tourists crashing upon the gates of dodge rolling and iframes increases every time. Soulsborne games are a special breed of game where the satisfaction comes from fighting with unfavourable odds and trying over and over, learning a little more each time until eventually you win. The feeling of beating a boss in a Souls game is unmatched, and Elden Ring in particular is a great intro point to the series, but hobby tourists don't care. They saw a popular game and just wanted to beat it and move on. With each new release, there will inevitably be articles about how the game should be easier, and that's a whole can of worms about how players who don't really care about the game throw people with disabilities under the bus for leverage in arguments. Another time, perhaps. This does bring me quite nicely onto the professional hobby tourists though, the video game reviewer. By their profession, they must be on each hot release with a review out as quickly as possible. They don't have time to truly enjoy any of the games they review. They are rewarded by being quick and not exploring outside the main story. This is why single-player linear games or narrative walking sims tend to get the higher review scores. They can actually finish and move on to the next thing. There is no time to engage with the game or its community, leaving a lot of fans frustrated with reviewers. If you've been a long-time fan of JRPGs like me, then you will feel that pain. This brings me nicely onto how angry hobby tourists get when hearing get good. To me, get good isn't gatekeeping. It's asking the player to engage with the game, because once you do, you will understand why you can't beat that boss. Have you thought about its weaknesses? Are you paying attention to its attacks? Are you thinking about how to dodge them? How do I overcome this challenge? It's like a puzzle. These thoughts are core to the franchise, and if you're not willing to have them, again, you just might not like this piece of media. Just because it's popular doesn't mean it's for you. It also comes across as just refusing to engage with the community on their level. It's supposed to be friendly mockery, not an aggressive statement. The Soulsborne community has a reputation for being standoffish, but most of them love these games and will happily help you when needed. The games are literally built on the idea of temporary cooperation after all. A multiplayer based on tenuous connections between distant strangers is thematic to the themes of isolation and hope within a dying world, but it also feeds into how the community forms around the game. To some degree, you're expected to help someone you don't know. This builds up almost mythological interactions, like Let Me Solo Her, which fosters a friendly, or at least open to helping community, similar to the Sprouts in Final Fantasy XIV. Also, just a quick aside, if you're genuinely fighting for disabled gamers, adaptable controllers and visual changes to the game do so much more than making the game easier. For example, I'm dyslexic and dyslexia fonts help me read just that little bit easier, but they don't fundamentally change the game.
Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild sit apart from other mainline Zelda games. The shift to open world design was divisive at first, but Breath of the Wild settled this immediately by becoming the best-selling Zelda game ever. I'm sure all of you know about these games, so I'd like to touch on something here. Being a hobby tourist can be unhealthy. The financial and emotional burden of trying to keep up with trends is not to be understated. People will buy the next game, the next console, the next DLC, the next battle pass, just to stay connected to the popular thing, but then maybe never play it again. Sometimes this is more than they can afford and is a form of financial self-harm. Or even if they can afford it and choose not to pay that fee, it can become a source of stress, leaving you feeling left out or no longer part of the group. Sequels always lose people, and I wouldn't be able to put a specific number on it to determine if the 20 million difference in sales was a normal rate of decay, but I can guess that some of the people who only played Breath of the Wild were hobby tourists. However, there is actually an important distinction here. A lot of them are only fans of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but they are fans. It's not uncommon for a hobby to have its own separate sub-communities. Look at any gaming genre, or shonen and shoujo fans. These people are both parts of smaller communities within a whole, and none are more or less fans than the other, as much as they'd often like to proclaim otherwise. A hobby tourist doesn't stick around. They wear the skin of a fan like a coat and change it with the winds of trend. They'll wear your favorite dress, then tell you it looks hideous on you. It's a facade of bitter convulsion of true enjoyment, wrapped in shame and dissatisfaction, a desire to fill a hole in the soul with whatever mangled mess is popular, even if it doesn't fit. And yet, while we have the joy of Larian Studios actually caring about what they make and the people who make it, BioWare, the creators of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 by the way, are absolutely shitting the bed with a public statement about how they have too many employees and they'll have to let them go. Sorry, not employees, not people, roles. Because while you were kicking them out of the door, you couldn't just drop the corporate speak and acknowledge the fact that these are people who have given decades of their life to you, could you? And still, I see people saying they feel conflicted about the new Dragon Age game because of this. I'm not. Don't fucking buy it if you think the company is morally reprehensible. Stop giving your money to companies you hate. A video game isn't a necessity, and as part of the rejection of hobby tourism, I think a lot of us need to acknowledge and understand that media consumption isn't a human right, but good labor conditions are. Play or watch something else, or try to find a way to consume it that doesn't directly benefit the company. Maybe wait a few months and hope they go bankrupt and dissolve so we can all feel a little more moral about it. Don't support companies you claim to hate just because you feel the need to be able to understand what people on Twitter are talking about. Develop a sense of personal taste and identity and seek out people who share your passions. Don't mold your passions to suit algorithmic floods of content and media. And I get it, it's hard. Everyone's having fun without you. You can't quite afford that game right now. You don't have the streaming site that TV shows on. As we write this, I've absolutely sunk more hours into retweeting horny fan art of Asterion than playing Baldur's Gate 3. In part because we have one copy between us and it's not on my PC, so editing this video has to come first. But I do want to play Baldur's Gate 3, today and tomorrow and weeks and months after that, maybe even years. It's clearly a game you could devote large parts of your life to, and I want to. I'm not saying anyone has to be perfect, we aren't, just try to think about how you interact with online communities and how you see media. There are hundreds of people and thousands of hours of effort behind every moment of something you enjoy, and I think that deserves some respect. So that's hobby tourism. Do you have any examples of where you've experienced this? Maybe you think we just made all that up. Let us know in the comments. The main thing we want to impress is that if you're going to join a community, there will be an element of conceding on both sides. New blood is great, but be kind and understanding. I think we should all just be a little more open to each other. If something is popular, you're allowed to enjoy it, but please, for the love of God, be nice to the people who were there before you. Speaking of being nice, if you feel like being nice, hit that like button, and if you feel like joining our little community of anime nerds, or whatever we decide to talk about next, feel free to subscribe and stick around. Thanks for watching. Bye bye!